Hey everyone, let's talk more about hustle culture. I'd like to talk today about the Puritan work ethic and why it might be controlling some of your thoughts. Some pros for both the 30-hour work week as well as a 40-hour work week compressed into 4 days, and also just a funny story about goat herding that I think you'll think is interesting.
Hey, this is Steph. I have my MBA and 20 years of corporate human resources experience. I want to help you step away from hustle culture. Let's go.
First, let's talk about the Puritan work ethic. To give you a definition, the Puritans thought that hard work in one's calling was considered a sacred duty and a direct form of worship to God. So that was okay when we were talking about working on farms and homesteads, and that direct work was actually benefiting the person doing the work. Instead of today's world where conveniently the Puritan work ethic has continued in terms of supporting capitalism and making people feel like they are more worthy for doing hard work that benefits other people. And before you come at me, I do want to mention that I do think there's a lot of benefits of hard work, and I think that all of us want to do meaningful work, that we can apply ourselves and it makes us feel good to do that work. What I'm talking about is the way capitalism is taking advantage of the typical worker in today's world in terms of the hours required and this hustle culture that makes everyone feel guilty for not working harder and working faster and sacrificing other parts of your life in order to do that. The other thing that this leads to that I find really troubling is this thought that it justifies that poor people are deserving of poverty, that people that are poor actually just are someone that doesn't work hard. Whereas statistically, we know that that is not true. Poverty for most people in today's world is not a result of laziness. So I used to brag, I'm so busy, until I took some time to think about that. I really thought that I enjoyed being busy, that I thrived on it. I'm kind of a type A person. I thought that me saying I was busy was a little bit of a soft brag. I would say I can't sit still. Most of the time when we talk to other friends and they say, how are you? Typically, most of us are like, oh, I've been so busy. And it's just almost a reaction at this point, almost like saying, I'm fine. I'm so busy signals productivity, importance, high demand, all things that we have come to feel boost our self-worth and our self-importance in today's society. The problem with that is the resulting belief that we need to earn rest. And that is the cause of a lot of misplaced priorities. It often leads to many of us chasing hustle culture instead of our personal contentment. There are a lot of reasons that you may need to reduce your hours, and we'll talk about some of those, and also just a little bit about part-time work. I wanted to touch base on the 30-hour week minimum, and sometimes it's 32 hours that a lot of companies place on full-time benefits. So when you are reduced hours, you may have your time reduced from 40 hours a week expectation down to maybe 30. So you're not reducing your hours to the point where you're losing your benefits. If you're reducing your hours to the point you're losing your benefits, generally you're considered a part-time employee, and that may be below 30 hours a week. Part-time employees are probably another separate episode, because it is only in the US that we are dependent upon our employers, generally for most of us, for our health benefits. So if that was taken out of the picture, then a lot of the reduced work week and the thoughts around part-time work would change, because our benefits wouldn't be tied to the number of hours a week that we're working. We see other countries where the 30-hour work week has been successful, and I want to talk about that today and a little bit about the pros of a 30-hour work week and why it really just hasn't gained a lot of traction in the United States. And a lot of that is tying back again to that story that we've been told in terms of the Puritan work ethic and why we should continue to work hard, stay busy, and embrace that as just part of normalized culture. The 5-day work week was instituted back in the factory floors in the 1920s, and that's when they began to convince people to live to work instead of work to live, if that makes sense. Before, more people were investing, as I said, in homesteads, in their personal farming environments, personal trades, where they were investing work that they reaped immediate benefits from. Before I talk about the 30-hour work week, I did want to tell a story personally from human resources in terms of people asking for reduced hours and how that can benefit us as employers even to attract and retain employees. So at various periods of our life, we all have times where reduced hours could be really helpful, and it's just not really readily available. If you think about people, the most commonly parents who are looking for reduced hours in order to, they would take a little bit less money at times to have more flexibility with their kids. Retirees who are beginning to sort of move towards retirement, but they don't want to just cut it from 50 hours a week to 0 overnight. They'd like to move into a more reduced schedule. There are a lot of situations from a health perspective. I know we do have FMLA. FMLA only legally applies in certain circumstances. It doesn't protect all workers. And we have a lot of instances with elder care where people need to reduce their hours as well on an ongoing basis. So the story I wanted to tell, though, is one that is much less common, just to say, hey, a lot of those type of situations are stigmatized because of the person that's asking, right? It's typically a woman, and there are a lot of stigma around working part-time in terms of the type of work that person is allowed to do, the responsibilities that they're allowed to have, whether they're really invested in the company. I had a younger male employee come to me several years ago who was a goat farmer, and I loved this because he wanted to reduce his hours because he needed time to be with his goats. And farming was part of what he wanted to do, but he was also a scientist. And so he had this full-time job with the company. I was the human resources partner for his business unit, and he was coming to say, can I go part-time? So the manager and I worked together to allow that to happen. And we retained this incredible employee, probably pretty long-term, because having that flexibility is something he really valued more than a lot of other things in terms of even potentially higher compensation or higher growth within the company. Not saying you can't have both, but the fact that this was something that was really important to him was going to allow the company to retain him longer. And for him, he was going for that contentment. Again, this was reduced hours. This meant reduced pay in terms of what he was bringing home, but he had this hobby or dream, maybe he wanted to turn it into something else, that was worth it to him to do that. And so if more people speak up and ask for part-time work, then it becomes normalized, and then it's not just the new mothers that are asking for part-time, but there are so many stages and different types of reasons why a lot of workers would really appreciate that option. One way to help a lot of people find relief from the stress over hustle culture may be to implement a 4-day work week. And this is where you have 40 hours, so you're getting paid full time, but you're compressing the work week into 4 days. And there's been a large study done on what that might mean for both employees and employers, and I want to talk about that. So this study, I'm going to put up some information about the study that happened. It was from greatplacetowork.com. The author of it was Ruby Storm Green, and it was actually an article where the author was talking about a study that happened in the UK. The UK ran the world's largest 4-day work week trial. And so during that time, during a 6-month pilot where they had 61 companies that agreed to move to the 4-day work week. And during that time, 92% of participating employers said they would continue with a shorter work week, with 18 of them confirming that it would be a permanent change. So during that time, they saw a lot of benefits for employee well-being. 71% reported reduced levels of burnout, 54% reported a reduction in negative emotions, 39% said they were less stressed, and 37% said their physical health improved during that time. Having that extra day, even though for this study, the 4-day work week, it wasn't reduced hours, it was a 40-hour work week, but compressed into 4 days. This allowed them 3 days to have for themselves. And company growth and revenue stayed roughly consistent over the trial period, and turnover, which can be costly, very costly to employers, dropped by 57%. This is a landmark study. So why are more US companies not adopting a 4-day work week? I think this all boils down to culture. It's just what is normalized in terms of how we think that the harder we are working and the more hours we are working, the more important we must be. A lot of that is rooted in this Puritan work ethic that we've adopted and continue to hold on to, and without questioning it. Because if you think about in the European study, all of these pros for the employee and for the company, it is something that more employers should consider here in the United States. For those of us who have worked in global companies, we know that there is a difference between some types of boundaries that are set by our European colleagues in particular, in terms of what they are willing to do. In August, typically a lot of the offices shut down. We really can't set big deadlines during August because so many Europeans are on vacation for that month. And I find this really interesting that that double standard is accepted, and that more US companies aren't allowing all of their employees, including those in the US, to adopt some of that flexibility. Take a look at this comic. I think we can all relate to the sentiment. We think it's funny, but it's also true that Americans are expected to be on call and fully available, even if we're on vacation, even if we're sick. That's become part of the corporate culture and is necessary for most employees who want to move up within large companies. Maybe we should ask ourselves at this point, who set these standards and who do they serve? Another tip, just to get you all thinking more about hustle culture, where it came from, and whether it's serving you. Thanks for watching. See you next time.